morning, everyone. Welcome to 15 Minutes with Lori. This morning, we're going to dig deep into inspections, contingencies, the entire process, and how to set the right expectations for your buyers and even your sellers. So whenever your buyer is contracted to purchase a home, obviously you want to encourage them, highly encourage them to get inspections. However, they need to hire a qualified home inspector, not somebody's brother who is a general contractor, not someone who's a handyman, but a qualified home inspector. It actually states that on the contract, in the contingency, and the contingency rider. If you're using a special sales contract, the rider states qualified home inspector as well. So they need to be certified. So who orders those inspections? That would be the buyer, okay? I know that some of you want to go above and beyond for your clients, and I think that's outstanding. However, when you call or the buyer calls the inspection company, they start asking questions about the home and what types of inspections they would like to have. So we all know that there are separate inspections for home, termite, sewer lateral, radon, chimney sweep, the list goes on and on. We're talking pools and spas, we're talking, septic tanks and wells, and there's so much more that you can, you don't want to spend your buyer's money. Let the buyers spend their money, but do encourage them to get all the appropriate inspections, because here's one thing that we need to do. We need to set the right expectations for our buyers. So when they hire somebody to inspect the home, that inspector is going to pick that house apart. They're going to literally log everything that is a problem, potential problem of the home. As a buyer, when you're buying a home, there's going to be maintenance involved. Let them know to focus on expensive items that they weren't ready for, situations where they might be hazardous or dangerous. Things like that are things that we want to focus on. If there's an outlet cover that's loose, buy them a Phillips screwdriver at closing. If the toilet is a little bit loose, we do need to make sure that the plumbing is okay. Toilet being loose could potentially be a little bit more serious situation, but there are some things in those inspection reports that buyers might be able to do on their own, or hire a handyman later on, that are inexpensive. So let them know to focus on those items that I kind of listed off. Now, when they're buying a home, they're not only buying an investment, they're investing in buying that investment. So in other words, they're spending money. There's going to be costs involved up front to purchase a home. And I'm not talking about, right now, closing costs or anything like that. I'm talking about costs in the inspection to make sure that the home is in the condition that they're satisfied with, or could be satisfied with, or have an understanding of what they're purchasing and getting themselves into. Okay. There's also the appraisal, the survey, and other things. But the buyer needs to know that the contract states that they will hire a qualified home inspector to inspect the home, of all its mechanics. There was a situation yesterday. One of our agents came to me and said the buyer met the inspector there, and the agent didn't go the inspection, which, I don't encourage agents to go to the inspection, because you could potentially, say things to the inspector or the buyer that aren't necessarily in your expertise. So let that be between the inspector and the buyer. You're going to review that report with that buyer to talk to them about what they may or may not want to ask the seller to do or get a monetary adjustment for. Okay, so yesterday there was a situation where the buyer met the inspector at the home and immediately called our agent, said, "I want out." And she said, "What do you mean you want out?" Well, they got there, and the first two things that the inspector inspected were large items, and they were serious problems. Okay, everything can be fixed though, guys. Remember that. The buyer immediately stopped the inspection and asked the inspector if they stopped it now, would he charge them? And he said no. They said, okay, we're going to get out of it. They left. They called our agent, said we went out. The agent explained to them that, when you do an inspection and you initiate the inspection notice on, I believe it's part 2, if the buyer immediately wants to terminate, they can. They do not have to submit the inspection. However, if the seller says, I would like to see the inspection report, and they don't have that inspection report from a qualified home inspector, they will not be able to terminate that contract. So in this case, the buyer is going to have to rehire their inspector potentially, or maybe have a termite inspection, something like that, in order to terminate if they so choose to. But I told the agent it's important to sit down with this buyer and talk to them about the issues that they found, just to see if they would want to maybe move forward, ask the seller to take care of these items or give a monetary adjustment so the buyer can take care of them later. Okay. So setting the right expectations for your buyers is very important. And I know we're talking about the buyers right now, but on the seller side, if you're listing a property, it's also important to set the right expectation for the seller. Let them know that inspector is going to pick that house apart. They're going to pull out things, note things that you've probably have lived with for 20, 30 years in this home. But the inspector was hired by the buyer to find literally everything that could potentially be wrong with that inspection. So, however, hoping that the buyer's agent will talk to their buyer about the importance of what to ask for. So the seller needs to be aware of some of the potential things that they may have to repair or adjust the price or give a credit for at closing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Lori, I have a question.
Yes.
So if the agent does not send the inspection notice back, what are our rights and all that good stuff? Or are you getting ready to go over that next?
Are you talking about when the buyer's agent submits it and then the seller's agent does not respond to it?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, if let's say they did the inspection, okay, and they have a report. When our agent fills out that inspection notice, they're simply going to check the box that says the buyer is terminating the contract, and the buyer signs it, they submit it. That means the contract is dead automatically. Seller does not have to respond. However, if the seller's agent contacts that buyer's agent, says, my seller would like to see the report. And if the buyer cannot give a report because they didn't have the full inspection, then that is not an out. Then it is not dead. So I'm not an attorney to see how that will pan out, but the contractually, the buyer would be obligated to give a qualified home inspection, by a qualified home inspector to that seller. But the seller does not have to respond on that inspection notice because it would automatically be dead. Does that answer your question?
Yes, kind of.
Okay.
And if the seller does not, okay, yeah, okay, yes, it does for that part, yes.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Bill, are there any comments you'd like to share this morning?
I think if the buyer is going to be getting out of the contract, you also need to send a mutual release over to get the earnest money back.
That's correct. The inspection notice terminates the contract, but obviously the mutual release is what's going to get the earnest money back. So thank you for bringing that up. Is there anything else? Mm-hmm.
I actually was helping an agent yesterday about that, where the seller wouldn't sign the mutual release, even though there was an issue with the septic tank and everything like that. So, and the inspection notice was sent over. So,
okay, yeah. So in that case, if the seller does not sign that mutual release, once that has been terminated, the buyer has a right to seek legal counsel. But that earnest money eventually will go to the Secretary of State, and it will be decided in the courts as to who is going to get that earnest money. But in most cases, most of the cases, that seller will give the earnest money back. But agents have to set the right expectations for not only their buyers and their sellers. So knowing that contract is vital. And if you're dealing with an agent that may not understand the contract, try to, and I know it's not your job, but try to assist, try to help them understand it. That way it makes it smooth for your client, okay? But in the end, if it becomes problematic, talk to your broker in your office, myself or Bill or Mark, and then we can reach out to that other broker and say, hey, I think your agent might be struggling a little bit with understanding the contract. Can you help us out with that? So, okay. Norm, is there anything you'd like to share this morning?
There is.
Absolutely.
Setting the right expectations, as Laurie is talking about, is really important. And because you assume the consumer knows what's in that contract, and they don't. And even though they might have bought a house or sold a house a number of times, they do not know what's in that contract. So taking the time to explain that to buyers and sellers is really important. The other thing that the majority of contracts that don't move forward are because of the building inspection. And one of the things, if you got a listing, one of the things the seller can do is hire their own inspector when they put it on the market, so they can be ready for what a buyer's inspector might look at. So that will avoid a lot of questions for the seller if they get that building inspection prior to putting it on the market. The other thing they can do is they can get the city or county inspection done prior to putting it on the market. The buyer can get some more confidence if he knows that it's past city inspection already. So I think if I was working today, I would have my sellers get a private building inspector prior to putting it on the market.
Thank you. And we do have some agents. I know the Twin team here in the Big Bend office, they encourage their sellers to always do a home inspection prior to putting the home on the market, so there's no surprises. So I really I like that tactic. I really do. Sue is asking, once an issue is presented in the inspection notice, followed by a mutual release, isn't the seller responsible for amending the seller's disclosure to include those issues? Yes. So if the inspection is issued to the seller, yes, they need to amend their seller's disclosure, adding that. In most cases, like if I had the seller, some cases you might encourage them just to attach that inspection to the supplements in the MLS, but there are a lot of little things on there. So, but yes, you are correct, Sue. Do most of them do it? No. Is it right? Absolutely not. So you do need to encourage your seller to disclose what is on that inspection if there is a mutual release and it's going back as active. So great question. I know I'm 2 minutes over. Just a couple of quick reminders. Every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, there is in-person contract training. Even if you've been in the business a long time, I encourage you to come back. It's a great refresher. There's always things to be talking about. There's always good reminders. Every situation is different. We're not going over it all the time whenever we are doing where we're working with buyers and sellers. So it is good idea to come back through that contract training. Again, every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Kathy Metz is our trainer there, and she thoroughly knows that contract. A couple more things. Thursday, tomorrow, 9 o'clock, Jim Kemp is doing his listing consultation training. All are welcome, but I do encourage you to let me know by the end of the day if you're going to be there so we can decide whether or not we need the large conference room or we can stay in the training room. And then at 1 o'clock tomorrow, Danielle Kemp is going to be doing the comparable market analysis with Moxie Present, which is a very powerful tool that can help not only get the listing, but get it sold. Then lastly, next Tuesday, Everyone is invited here at 3 o'clock at the Big Bend office. We're going to have a short meeting and a big luau. We're going to have a Hawaiian luau. So bring your smiles and your laughs, and we're going to have a great time. Everybody have a great day, and we will talk to you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.